Welcome everyone, thank you all for joining us. This is the Citizens Institute on Rural Design presenting our Rural Design webinar series. This webinar will be recorded live. If you'd like to ask any questions of our presenters or moderators during the course of the webinar, you can do so in the chat box. The Citizens Institute on Rural Design is a leadership initiative of the National Endowment for Arts in collaboration with the Housing Assistance Council and Building Community Workshop. The Housing Assistance Council, known as HAC, is a national nonprofit that focuses on communities across rural America through investment and assistance with affordable housing and community and economic development initiatives. Building Community Workshop is a nonprofit community design firm that works with communities across the country to elevate their strengths and help address their needs through design. Our third webinar is the Rural Design webinar series focused on rural design for a new future. Across the nation, small communities are adapting to a global pandemic and calls for racial equity. How can design and community engagement adapt to these challenges? Today, we're featuring speakers leading historic preservation at many African American churches, providing entrepreneurship opportunity for their Native American tribe, and working with students to develop affordable housing in the rural South. I'm so pleased to bring you these wonderful speakers today. We have Brent Leggs from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, Heather Fleming from Change Labs, Rusty Smith from Rural Studio and Auburn University. Please welcome our first speaker, Brent Leggs from the National Trust for Historic Preservation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you today and my colleagues, and I look forward to highlighting the program that I run at the National Trust, which is the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund. And I want to start with this first image. We all remember the tragic events that happened in 2017 in Charlottesville, where white men wearing khaki pants, polo shirts, holding tiki torches on the campus of University of Virginia would rally around a Thomas Jefferson sculpture to advocate for their ideology of hate and to advocate for a modern day form of Jim Crow. In essence, we wanted to respond and to showcase that the linking between culture and preservation practice was a solution to help mitigate some of the social crisis in our nation at that time. And our view was that it was critically important to begin to tell the full American story. So we remember what happened in 2015 at Mother Emanuel in Charleston, South Carolina. A white nationalist would massacre 9 Americans inside of a sacred house of worship. In many ways, this is the America that we live in. I wanted to highlight this image, not for shock value, but to highlight that in 2018, one of our own National Trust historic sites was vandalized with these words, and it just affirms once again the importance of American history and historic places that can either be used for hate and negative ideology, or that can be used to provide a positive impact to our nation. This building right here is the second oldest extant standing Black church building in the United States. It's located in Nantucket, Massachusetts. The African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund is about creating space, making space to expand the American story and American culture. And in essence, we view the Action Fund as an emerging social movement in service to our nation. And I want to highlight some stories and places that we are promoting and celebrate through the Action Fund. One is Mount Zion Baptist Church. I'll highlight more about the current work to reimagine the reuse of this remarkably significant historic church building. It's located in Athens, Ohio, and in many ways, this is the prototype. It is the example of Black resilience, Black achievement. It is the example of a historic building that was designed by Black minds and built by Black hands, and has been at the epicenter of the Athens Black community for more than 100 years. This church matters. The African Meeting House, which is located in Boston, Massachusetts. It is the oldest extant Black church building in the United States, constructed in 1806. This is where the abolitionist movement came together, a multiracial coalition to advocate against their disdain of the institution known as American slavery. The legends like William Lord Garrison and Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and others spoke at that pew. Then, of course, you have places like the home of Harriet Tubman in Auburn, New York. We all know that Harriet Tubman, who was once called the Moses of her people, would lead the Underground Railroad movement and lead enslaved African Americans to freedom. Her beloved home stands in Auburn, New York, as well as the home of the aged, and this place has a story to tell. Rosenwald Schools. If you haven't heard about Rosenwald Schools, you should know this American story. It was born in the mind of the legendary educator and activist Booker T. Washington as a response in a crisis in Black education. In many ways, Rosenwald Schools stand as the legacy of his bold idea, and in many ways, it is one of the most remarkable and successful social movements in American history. More than 5,000 schools built in 15 southern states. The gentleman here is Robert Taylor, the first licensed professional Black architect in America, first graduate of MIT. Booker T. Washington recruited him to start up the School of Architecture at Tuskegee, and Robert Taylor and others would design the first Rosenwald School building plan. I hope you have heard of an under-recognized female poet, Lucille Clifton. This is her home in Baltimore, Maryland. A group of artists have acquired the space and envision an art-centric program to honor both Lucille Clifton, who was the poet laureate of the state of Maryland, two-time Pulitzer Prize nominee. She's a legend and a former contemporary of Langston Hughes. This place matters. Many of you may not have heard of the National Center of Afro-American Artists, which is located in Boston, Massachusetts. This grand estate was acquired by the founder, Elma Lewis, who was a visual artist, and after attending a national conference in Boston for Black creative intellectuals, she would found the center, and this is an anchoring cultural institution in the heart of the Roxbury neighborhood in Boston. I'm sure you have heard about the legendary civil rights activist and musician, stage actor, the legendary Paul Robeson. His former home, where he retired, is located in Philadelphia, and it anchors the West Philadelphia neighborhood, and the programming here is about uplifting and empowering the Black community. I'm sure you've heard of John, and hopefully Alice Coltrane. John Coltrane, inside this ranch-style house, would spend a week in a second-floor bedroom and compose one of his greatest masterpieces called A Love Supreme. Following his death, Alice would record in their basement studio her first 5 albums. This place, in sight of the recent past, highlights an example of Black love, Black family, and how a historic home was a space for stimulating art and creativity. I hope you've heard of August Wilson, his former home in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. August Wilson wrote a play, 10 series about the Black experience in this city, and in particular in this neighborhood. And a group of artists, family members, and others have organized themselves around the reuse, preservation, and activation of this space. And you can see here in this photo how they have leveraged the rear yard to be able to put on one of August Wilson's plays. Perhaps you've heard of the legendary blues musician, Muddy Waters. His home stands vacant in Chicago, Illinois. Muddy Waters is considered the father of modern jazz and blues in Chicago. And we are supporting an heir, his granddaughter, who is leading the preservation effort to reactivate this historic space, as well as his rehearsal studio that was located in the basement. There are other American stories that aren't as uplifting, stories that shifted the national consciousness of our nation and really was a catalyst for the American Civil Rights Movement, and that was the murder of Emmett Till. The Emmett Till Interpretive Center is currently working in Sumner, Mississippi, a rural location with a population of 450 people, to tell this important civil rights story so that our nation never forgets, but also to leverage the power of place and preservation as a strategy for community revitalization. So in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which we have all recently heard about, in 1921, there was a racial massacre in Tulsa. It destroyed what was once known as Black Wall Street and a thriving and prosperous Black community. The only edifice that still stands as a physical remnant of that massacre and tragedy is Vernon AME Church. And I'm delighted to say that we provided our largest grant of $150,000 to help them to restore the historic stained glass windows. So Birmingham, Alabama was once known as Bombingham. And in 1956, the home church of the legendary civil rights leader, Fred Shuttlesworth, was bombed. The parsonage building that you see on the right, actually on Christmas Day, December 25th, 1956. Thankfully, he and his family was not murdered in that assassination attempt on his life. Today, the church building stands as an interpretive center to tell the civil rights story in Birmingham. I wanted to highlight the ways that communities can be engaged related to complicated histories, can take ownership and reclaim that history to be reminded of the cultural legacy that exists there. And the shadows in the background is the historic 16th Street Baptist Church. We all remember the tragic events that happened in the fall of 1963 and the assassination of 4 young girls. But today the church is telling 2 stories. It's highlighting the architectural story. This church building and the parsonage residential building adjacent to it was designed by Rayfield Wallace, who is the 2nd licensed Black architect in America. And of course, they're telling their civil rights story and have created a remarkable exhibition that is displayed in the church basement. So perhaps you've heard of the voice of the American Civil Rights Movement, Miss Nina Simone. This is the home where she was born, where she would learn to play the piano and would begin to be that champion for human rights. We partnered with 4 New York City-based visual artists to develop a stewardship plan to restore, interpret, and to return back this formerly vacant historic house to the local community. It's located in Tryon, North Carolina, population of 2,500 people. And what's beautiful is they are leveraging African-American cultural heritage, Nina Simone's legacy to envision and grow a creative economy. So the last image that I want to highlight for you is Claiborne Temple. And I think this is relevant to the moment that we're in. The Black Lives Matter movement is beginning to link political activism and economic justice. And it's not a new strategy. It's one that was developed in 1968. This is where Dr. King led 15,000 sanitation workers on a march advocating for equal pay, fair employment. This was an example of the civil rights movement becoming more sophisticated when it linked political activism and economic justice. Claiborne Temple stands today vacant, but is led by a strong and capable organization that will return this historic place back to the community. Preservation today, modern preservation, is really about equity and racial justice through the lens of preservation practice and architecture. This moment calls for new forms of partnership, interpretation, and community. It is the way that urban and rural communities can tell their story and create that new sense of community. So in closing, I want to highlight briefly for you a project that is led by CIRD that is looking at the reimagining of historic Mount Zion Baptist Church in Athens, Ohio. So when we intervene in the preservation of nationally significant historic buildings, the first thing is to do no harm. It is to ensure that the stewardship strategy is the right approach to make sure that the physical evidence of that history is preserved. It is retained for future generations to interact with that history. You see the historic building on the left, and partly the vision is a hybrid approach, rehabilitation of some of the interior spaces and a restoration treatment for the exterior so that this building always looks and retains its architectural and historical integrity. But this historic space has spatial limitations. So the idea is to create a web of cultural spaces and experiences for visitors based on the Mount Zion Baptist Church Historical Preservation Society's vision for preservation and reuse. They want to create a knowledge hub, heritage tourism hub, and a arts space, a space of culture to be able to engage the community in this history, thus needing additional buildings for support. So you see the little blue house is being imagined as a cafe. The church building is the knowledge hub for cultural events. Here you get a sense of the spatial interior layout of the building. The current basement does not support reuse. The ceiling height is too low, so needing to accommodate some changes to the basement space to be able to make that functional for contemporary use. And then the main programming happening in the historic sanctuary space. There's also a need, as I shared earlier, to create adjacent supporting spaces to support programming. And some of the ideas is to acquire and to reuse this historic house for that purpose. So once this final report is available, you will get a sense of a comprehensive and sophisticated preservation strategy that's being considered for the reuse of historic Mount Zion. I'm hopeful, and our partners are hopeful, that what's developed here, both in process and in implementation, will become a national model for other vacant historic church buildings and sites across the United States. The thing that I want to leave you with is that the Preservation Society, as a new and emerging organization, it takes time to build technical capacity to do preservation work, especially in rural markets where the fundraising capacity is limited. It takes a level of sophistication to make informed financial arguments and decisions that have lasting impact in historic buildings. So I want to challenge any artist, any preservationist, any philanthropist that are listening to this webinar. Support this organization in realizing their vision. Help them to establish co-stewardship agreements and long-term partnerships that will sustain their programming and the preservation and stewardship of this historic site. It is a bold vision for Athens, Ohio. It is important that the Black community has a space where Black culture thrives, and it's important that this community can leverage its African American history for all of the citizens of Athens. Thank you so much. Next, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Rusty Smith.
Hello, everyone. I am not Rusty. My name is Heather. Let me see, advance the slide. There we go. One too far. Hello, and welcome to any Native brothers and sisters on the call today. Yat'e, Shik'e do Shedine. She'e Heather Fleming Inishya, and I'm a member of the Navajo Nation and also the executive director at Change Labs. Bit'ane Nishle, Bilagana Bashish Chin, Todachini Deshiche Ado Bilagana Deshanale. Tonanist Ize Nasha Echehet. And I wanted to start today by illustrating, sorry, getting back hold of the screen. Start by illustrating what a typical Change Labs member looks like. So this is Brent Todlina, and he's the owner of Ashki Bada Moccasins on the Navajo Nation. And Brent runs his business from his home by necessity. And throughout his entrepreneurial journey, he will run into a variety of hurdles to legally operate a business from the res. I've added the most common hurdles we hear from the business owners in our community. Oh, shoot, it keeps going faster than me. The lack of reliable internet access to reach new customers, lack of labeled roads, which makes getting an EIN number nearly impossible. The lack of recognized roads also makes it nearly impossible for Brent to get Ashki Bada on Google infrastructure like Google Business. Brent eventually wants to have a storefront or a leather workspace that isn't his couch, but the lack of retail infrastructure on the res means that people have to run their business from their home. And to build a storefront from scratch requires a business site lease to access land, and that's a multi-year process that most people can't afford from a finance or time perspective. And then the lack of ability to own land has even more dire side effects to entrepreneurs like Brent. There's already a shortage of banks on the reservation, but now try and access a small business loan when you have no collateral. My co-founder Jess and I have spent the last 4 years documenting and categorizing these challenges that Native entrepreneurs face, and Brent's situation is not an isolated one. Last month, Change Labs released our first research report on the state of doing business on Navajo, using an established set of indicators developed by the World Bank. Sorry, I'm reading, okay. By the World Bank. Okay, and the World Bank methodology measures the state of doing business in 190 nations around the globe. And analyzing that data revealed that the Navajo Nation ranks amongst the worst 15% of nations in the world for doing business. We're about on par with Central African Republic. And the most challenging thing about Change Labs work is that there isn't any one thing that needs to be fixed. It's this entire entrepreneurial ecosystem is complex and it's layered, and we map it out, it looks like this. And some of these challenges are more prominent than others, but what we've learned is that, like any complex system, it's difficult to make change to just one of these supports and then expect all of them to improve. To really affect change requires a holistic approach. And speaking of that change, this is the change that we want to see. Change Labs' mission statement: to empower Native families to define and expand their own livelihoods by removing institutional barriers to entrepreneurship, eroding social barriers, and expanding their access to capital. Basically what that means, or what Change Labs does, is we provide creative workspace tools and resources and knowledge for Native entrepreneurs. And we have 5 programs, or 5 ways that we do that. We run a residency program for Native artists and Native designers. We operate a co-working space to bridge that gap in physical infrastructure on the reservation. So in our little space in Tuba City, you can get a desk, you can get on Wi-Fi, you can print, you can use our little marketing tools. And then we're most known for our business incubator for Native American entrepreneurs in Navajo, Hopi, White Mountain Apache, Pueblo. Each year we select 20 high potential entrepreneurs to enroll in this program. Ugh. And I mentioned that we launched our first research report earlier this year. That's all part of our data initiative called Doing Business, where we're creating a doing business indicator that's specific to the Navajo Nation to help drive our own advocacy initiative, but also to drive evidence-based policy changes. And I'm going to talk about this again a little bit later on, but kinship lending is our character-based loan program for entrepreneurs. And this is a very new program that we created in response to COVID-19. We also create a number of resources to help entrepreneurs leapfrog some of the common barriers to entrepreneurship. One of the biggest ones being business registration and certifying as a Navajo-owned business. And it was actually through an NEA grant that we developed this tool called buildnavajo.org. And it's just an online tool that helps you understand how to register a business, how that differs from certification on Navajo, and then an overview of the business site lease process so that everyone can understand the steps to get through that multi-year, multi-step process. So my friend Courtney Spearman emailed me the invitation to join this panel, and she asked me specifically about Change Labs' COVID response. And I initially thought, I'm not sure what we're really doing differently as a result of COVID. But in creating this presentation, when I had to really think about it, it turns out there's a lot that we're doing differently. So these last 4 slides are the big shifts that we've implemented in just the last 5 months. And the thing with Navajo, though, is that we were already in an economic crisis before COVID hit. So now we have an economic crisis on top of an economic crisis. And a lot of that is exacerbated by the fact that we don't have consistent internet access across the res. So transitioning online wasn't a simple prospect for most of our community members. And as a result, we're doing things now that we hadn't anticipated before, like paying for purchasing, acquiring, setting up connectivity equipment so that people can participate in programs. Fortunately, one of the coaches on our team has an IT background and runs an IT business in addition to the work that he does with Change Lab. So he's been able to champion that. And then we're also to the point now where it looks like we're going to be paying directly for some people's internet bills just so that they can get from very low bandwidth speeds to bandwidth speeds that enable them to join the modern world. And for those who are able to just transition online, we launched a Getting Online video series for artisans. We turned our residency program, which initially was targeting visual artists and graphic designers. We quickly transitioned it to more like a web designer in residence, whose sole purpose this next year is to help 10 business owners get online. And then that's been supported by grant money, like a BBB grant that we received that's going to help Change Labs pay the hosting fees for any of those entrepreneurs that we help get online. Because even though a hosting fee can be as low as like $215 for an e-commerce site, that's $250 that most people in our community just don't have. And then finally, we're also promoting Res Rising, which is a platform that we launched at the beginning of 2020. It's basically a digital yellow pages that includes more than 500 Native-owned small businesses across the Southwest. And for the majority of them, Res Rising is their first or their only online presence. And when we created Res Rising, we wanted it to be a gateway for them to continue building their online presence and tap into new customers and new markets. And I think that's definitely critical now more than ever. So it's quickly turned into a great COVID tool for us. So besides transitioning online, we're also doubling down on creating workspace in our community. The Navajo and Hopi Nations are in the process of reopening this month, but Change Labs secured permission to reopen our facilities in mid-May for co-working and for entrepreneurial support. We're also harnessing CARES relief money to 7x our footprint, creating even more physical space available to entrepreneurs in our community. And then we've also just decided to offer all of this space for free to select businesses through 2021. But the need for land, for space, for infrastructure, and tribal communities for business is greater than that. To get from a 15% ranking to even a 50% ranking is a huge lift. So we're also trying to get the support from Congress on the easy stuff. A lot of communities and neighborhoods on Navajo are littered with abandoned federal buildings from the old BIA days. And these buildings are not accessible to our community leaders because they're federal property. And they take up really valuable real estate that could be used by local businesses. So we've launched a campaign and a petition to clean up the BIA buildings in Native communities and get them released back to our local leaders for economic development initiatives. And we collaborated with Tommy Gray Eyes, a local Navajo artist who's been wheat pasting photographs of entrepreneurs in our programs. Entrepreneurs who desperately want and need retail space or workspace, but they can't access it. He's been wheat pasting their photos on these buildings to show what's possible if we invested in our local business owners. Whoa. We've also been working on getting money out the door. So kinship lending that I mentioned earlier is a brand new program for us that we created within a week, thanks to the support of our partners and our donors. We raised $150K within a month to lend to 37 new borrowers. And like many organizations, we've been working on aggregating resources and putting them online, creating a web page that we edit weekly, looking specifically for grant and loan opportunities that are applicable to businesses that are located on tribal lands. One of the biggest opportunities available to the people in our community is a brand new program, the Navajo Nation Cares Relief Grant, that targets Navajo small business and artisans. And Change Labs is actively collaborating with the Navajo Nation Division of Economic Development to support the rollout of that new grant program. And then finally, again, probably like many other organizations, we've had to become extremely flexible in our work and specifically our internal policies. We've had COVID sickness within our immediate team, deaths within our families, heavy trauma within our communities in the past 5 months, and this all puts a strain on everyone on the team. It shifts everyone's priorities. And so Change Labs had to shift too. We're supporting staff who need time for community work. My co-founder, Jess, I think she's the best example. In addition to working for Change Labs, she also co-founded the Navajo Hopi Families Relief Fund in April and has raised nearly $6 million within 4 months to distribute food and supplies to families all around the reservation. So she and the other founders of this initiative basically built the Navajo Nation's largest distribution company within a month, in addition to just, doing her other work. And one of my other team members has decided to run for office in her community to help those in need. We have other team members who need time off during the day to deliver food to family members, to drive elders to get tested, and so on. And I think all of us felt initially stressed trying to do all of this work in our spare time and also trying to do our Change Labs work. So we changed our policies so that our community work is our Change Labs work, and then hired 2 more staff to help redistribute the workload. So I'm looking at this list. I'm really proud of what we've been able to accomplish and change in the last 5 months. And I'm grateful to Courtney for forcing me to think about it, because I think there's much to celebrate. And of course, I'm also grateful this opportunity to speak about it. And unfortunately, I have to jump to another webinar, but if you have any questions, here's my email, and thank you so much for having Change Labs. And now I'd like to hand it over to Rusty Smith.
Thanks, Heather. It's really nice to be here with you and Brent and sort of talk about some of the work that we're doing in West Alabama and beyond, and hopefully connect some dots across where we all have sort of this collective interest in place-based work. Rural Studio is part of Auburn University's architecture program. We have a 5-year undergraduate architecture program. That's pretty normal in sort of architectural education space for undergraduate students. Typically, students will come to the university as true freshmen right out of high school and study for 5 years. And at the end of that time, they leave us and can become practicing licensed and registered architects. As part of their time their 5 years at Auburn University, they have the opportunity to come out to Rural Studio, which is a residency-based remote program about 3 hours away from campus. It is located in rural West Alabama. And the students come to us from anywhere, depending on what time of their education they join us, from anywhere from 1 semester to up to 2 years of that 5 years of study. The program is kind of in the language that we use. It's a design build program. That simply means that students both design and build all kinds of community infrastructure in this sort of underserved community where we live and work. The program was started almost 30 years ago by Samuel Motby and D.K. Ruth, and it just had a handful of really simple premises. The first was that the best way to learn how to do things is to actually do them. So students often come to university to be invested in knowledge, and we've found that it's only through action and experience are we able to transfer that knowledge into know-how. As you know, sort of Heather alluded to when she sort of talked about that in Change Lab's work, where there's you know, not one single thing that needs to be fixed. There's a lot of approaches that you have to take. It's really complex. We also have found that when you're trying to do really difficult things that you don't know how to do, the best way to do them is to try to tackle it together. So the work is extraordinarily collaborative because of the complexity of the work. And the last sort of premise behind the program when it was founded was that, you know, everyone deserves access to good and dignified design, whether they can afford it or not, and that architects as professionals have a sort of a professional responsibility that when they see folks in crisis, that we need to act. We are located in Alabama. Auburn is over on the east side of the state. Birmingham is our financial center, kind of in the north central part of the state. Montgomery is our capital city. Selma, Alabama is located right in the belly button of the state. And then Hale County, where we're operating, is over on the western part of the state. And this relationship between Hale County and Selma and Montgomery is really, really important. We're in this area that's called the Black Belt. It's a historically agricultural area. It has a great history. It's a sort of a remarkable, holds a remarkable place in you know, sort of obviously the ongoing sort of movement for civil rights and voting rights. We are in an area that's considered to be persistently impoverished. As many of you here know, that's simply a federal designation that means that a county has had its 20% or more of its residents live consistently and persistently in poverty for 30 years or more. Of course, as we begin to look at populations in these counties, you know, those percentages, when you begin to look at childhood populations, elder populations, and populations of color, those percentages can jump, you know, quite high, well above 30, 40, and even 50%. Just as an aside, there are about 370 to 380 persistently impoverished counties in the United States. Over 85% of them are rural. So this issue of persistent poverty is particularly a rural problem. That said, it is this place where we work in West Alabama and Hale County is a place of great wealth, both financially and historically. But it's also a place of sort of absolute abject poverty. It continues to be remarkable how folks live in these sort of hidden away rural places. Now, the truth is, you know, sort of 30 years on, not many folks live, not many of our neighbors and clients live in tar paper shacks like that one that I just showed you, where the Harrises were living when we first worked with them. This is what's replaced our housing stock. It's the second and third hand trailer home, and it's pretty stiff competition. This is Newbern, Alabama, where we live and work. It's a thriving metropolis of 186 people. We're extraordinarily fortunate in that we still have a federal building. The little white building on the left is our post office, and we have an operating grocery store, a mercantile, right next door. Most towns this size don't have either of those institutions. We're fortunate to have both. This is the building that where we work. It's affectionately referred to as the Red Barn. And if you're familiar with architecture school, when you come inside, you'll see that it operates and functions just like any architecture program around. Our students live and work on a working farm there in Newbern. Understanding kind of food access issues and food insecurity issues, knowing where your food comes from is really important to us. Our students, as I said, it's a residency program. They live with us. We have dormitories that the students themselves have built. If you're familiar with Rural Studio, you know that we have a long history of material experimentation. We experiment on ourselves, not our clients. So these are some small, what we refer to as living pods, where our students that have designed and built over the years, where they live in residence. And you'll see that they are neat and tidy and studious, just like students anywhere in America. The first project that Rural Studio ever designed and built, it was really, the program was not even intended to be a program. It was to sort of work with Shepherd and Alberta Bryant to replace a house for them. This was the hay bale house that was built about 27 designed and built about 27 years ago by students. Another house, the Harris house, also referred to as the butterfly house. Beginning to think about how a house can both be functional and noble, and actually can respond very significantly to its climactic conditions. As I said, our students look like students at any university in the United States. They come out to us, and when they very first join us, they're involved in neck down work. So that moving from a knowledge space to a workspace. And in this case, they've been donated a couple of barns here. They're taking down one of the barns and categorizing the materials, sort of learning how to put something together by taking something apart that might have been built really well in the past. All of the work is real. So they work with real clients, with real budgets, with real sites, and hopefully with real positive outcomes. In this case, in this example, the students are working with Rosalie Turner, who was living in a home that was literally falling down around her. She had 2 adult sons that had been displaced, and the students are working with Rosalie to understand what kind of home they might be able to provide for her that could help bring her sons back home to live with her. The students, as they work with clients, they also work with all kinds of professional consultants, architects like Glenn Murkett here, structural engineers like Anderson Inge. And through this work, the students learn everything that they need to know about how they might not just design their buildings, but actually how they might be assembled and how they might build them. And then the students actually get out and do build them. And this is pretty typical of how they work. This little white house to the left is Rosalie Turner's house. It's a simple idea. You keep Rosalie sheltered in place in her home, build a replacement home on her existing property right in front of the new home, move her into the house, and then tear her existing house down. In this case, the students also designed this home to be built in phases. So there was a second wing to be built onto the house that would bring her sons home. Here's the house under construction. The interior of the house, as it's getting finished up, you can see Allie here. She's actually the interior wood in the homes, as well as those bricks on that back firewall that she's assembling, all came from that barn that you saw the students disassembling. And this is Rosalie and her 2 sons on the day they moved into the home. So it's a really sort of open, spacious, airy interior. You'll find that all of our buildings, whether they're houses or community projects, they all feature sort of really prominent, hopefully beautiful front porches. The front porch is a really important both environmental space and social space and historical space for our community members. When this is the house as it is today. When literally the day after Rosalie and her family moved in, the students, here you can see Rosalie's little white house there, the unfinished first phase of the new house to the left. The day after they moved in, the students sort of tore down the original house and then ultimately built this additional wing off to the side, providing this really, while it's a very small house, a large courtyard for the family to live in. We do all kinds of work. This is a church, Antioch Baptist Church, that the students have designed and built. Park Pavilion in Perry Lakes Park, a fire station for New Bern. This is it under construction. This is it today. Became a community meeting place that was so useful and significant to New Bern that eventually there was another group of 4 students designed and built this town hall, which provided not just a place for the town council and the town to meet, but also provided a consecrated place to vote, which is sort of access to voting is extraordinarily important in this part of the world, as you might imagine. A group of students working with Boys and Girls Club, standing in front of a framing model that shows their client that they know how to build what they propose to build. A few months later, the students actually on site building that actual building that they just proposed, and the Boys and Girls Club today, which also, as you features this sort of prominent big porch that we sort of talked about. Another project, a little abandoned bank building in New Bern, Alabama, that was renovated as a library for the town of New Bern, bringing both after-school programs and high-speed internet to New Bern. We continue on with our housing work, with where we've designed and built countless sort of prototypes of housing for our clients and our community. We've understood dealing with these issues of housing affordability, that houses have to be durable, buildable, weatherproof, and secure. This is sort of the floor that we build on. But we also think that in the affordable housing space that we can be aspirational. We think that houses should have a sense of presence. We think that they should be designed to foster a sort of a sense of community. They need to, with intention, sort of contribute directly to the health and wellness of both the folks who build them as well as the residents that live in the homes. They have to provide long-term accommodation for both aging in place and sheltering in place. And finally, even though they're built locally with local knowledge, local materials, and local labor force, they have to be well crafted. We do have a number of houses that we're working with external partners. These are just a few of them that we have where we are actually working with external partners now to provide these houses out into the larger world. In our location, Rural Studio works sort of in a charity model of production where we design and build and give, whether there are houses or our community projects to our community members. But we're working now with external partners around the Southeast to offer our house plans and our technical assistance to other housing providers to build these houses in their own service areas in their own delivery model. And these are just a couple of examples of those. These are a couple of houses that were built over in Chattahoochee Hills, Georgia, and then an example of a home that was built by a Habitat for Humanity affiliate in Lee County, Alabama. With just the last couple of minutes that I have, I did want to talk about sort of what design means to us as we work in this place. And it really is about communication, always, sort of being engaged in your community. And it's not just providing sort of solutions, but it's actually beginning to try to work and have conversations with our community members and our clients to understand what is useful. We often think of design as problem solving. We actually think that's sort of a side effect of design. Problem seeking is really what we're heavily invested in, really beginning to truly understand the issues that our community faces. We often think about, when listening to our clients to try to understand, we think about asking questions better, but we've actually found is all of our clients and neighbors and community members actually help us ask better questions. We'll often find that the questions that we're asking aren't the right questions. And so working together with our community, we learn to do that better. We also think about sort of actions, about verbs. We don't, as an example, we don't think about affordable housing. Affordable housing is a thing, that's a noun. When you see affordable housing in the landscape, you know what it is. You say, there it is. We really think about issues. We think about housing affordability and how that extends well beyond just the brick and mortar problems that architects can address, but into kind of the systemic, sort of deeply rooted issues that lead to these challenges of housing affordability. And then we also think about this issue of income and wealth, that often we think that if we can just solve income problems, that will address many of our issues. But we found in many of our communities, it's this issue of wealth is one of our significant challenges. And so beginning to work with partners to understand how to do that is important. And then finally, we try to look through just trying to solve for what things cost. We often address problems by thinking about, what does it cost us to do that? Or what does it cost us to do this other thing? But we think it's more important to ask a question, what does the house afford? Or really, maybe even more importantly, to begin to ask, what is the cost of inaction? This cost of doing nothing is extraordinary. And if we can begin to better understand what the cost of inaction is, this notion of what it costs to tackle some of these challenges that all three of our organizations are trying to face, I think we're much further down the road towards addressing them. So thank you very much. And I know Evelyn and Dan, you guys probably want to open it up for some questions. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much, Brent. So for everyone listening, you are able to ask questions in the chat box. If you're on your screen for the presentation, you can press Q&A and submit a question for me as a moderator or for the two presenters that we have remaining. Again, Heather had to leave, unfortunately. It looks like we have a couple of questions in the chat box already. Are there any tips or best practices for building the capacity of ordinary citizens to take on increasingly complex planning processes or even basic architecture? Is the question. Brent, I know you were mentioning this a bit when referring to the process with Mount Zion and having a kind of a small board of retired or otherwise employed participants, if you wanted to take a stab at that.
Yeah. What I tell emerging nonprofits, and the same thing that I share with established organizations that have been around for 3 to 5 decades, to focus on short-term priorities for advancing the mission of the organization. And that's often focused on preservation planning, that's focused on fundraising, and that's focused on nonprofit management. What I've seen in my 15 plus years of work experience is that the fun part for many emerging organizations is their passion and love and connection to the history, thinking about the programming and visioning for the reuse of that history. But the minutia and the details and the structure needed to move forward those great and creative ideas happens at the board level. And it is pragmatically looking at what are our 6-month or 1-year benchmarks for moving forward our preservation planning activities, our fundraising, and our nonprofit management. And if newly emerging organizations can focus on those 3 priorities with 6-month benchmarks, that will then begin to teach you how to work more focused and more effectively, and hopefully advance your mission more effectively.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And for both of you, I know Heather spoke a little bit about some of the challenges that her organization was shifting in response to coronavirus. And both of you guys work in these really community engaged spaces where you're designing to gather people together. How has your work changed over the last 5 months, and what do you hope to continue to achieve?
Rusty, I'll let you go.
Yeah, so I hope you jump in there, Brent. It's really complicated. You know, being an academic institution, a lot of the answers to that Evelyn, are emerging, and we just started school this week. We just got our first group of students back on the ground working since the last 5 months. When we had that big shutdown back on, I think almost across the United States on, kind of March 12th to March 13th, we had about 24 hours to shut down all of our project sites and send our students home. So that was a little bit stressful. We spent the summer working with the university to try to understand in the kind of ever evolving kind of information milieu, like we all have been, to try to figure out how to open back up safely and successfully. Our communities are so challenged. We're operating in some of the highest risk communities regardless. And then you sort of look at the overlay relative to the communities that are so negatively impacted by COVID-19. We're right in the thick of it. So protecting our neighbors and our community members and our clients is first and sort of foremost. Obviously, getting students back on the ground, working in a safe manner has been extraordinarily important. We can't do our work unless we're physically in the community working hand in hand. So what we've done is we are fortunate in that we have some upsides. We do work almost when we've got job sites, of which we have 7 that we've opened back up. They're outside. We work in small groups. We typically work in groups of 3 to 4 students with an instructor. We can safe social distance. We have a lot of guidance, obviously not just through the CDC, but because we're sort of work on job sites. OSHA provides a lot of safety precautions that we can follow. So we get a lot of good guidance to do the work. But it's absolutely critical. The issues that our community faces haven't gone away because of COVID-19. They haven't stopped. And if anything, they've gotten worse. And so that's been, job one is to get back. We're working where we're working because of the challenges that our communities face. We've got some really hardworking, dedicated students who are committed to keeping their eye on the ball, understanding what their job is, and doing the things that they need to do to keep their community members safe and secure, their clients safe and secure, and keep us open and working. They're really super. Our students are really focused on the job at hand, and so it's really, they're our security in some ways that will allow us to continue work. We have done a lot more of this, particularly with our remote clients. We're doing a lot of, we have clients that are building houses throughout the Southeast. So providing technical assistance where we normally be face-to-face, traveling a lot on job sites, we're doing a lot more of this. We have just recently been able to travel, and so we are doing a little bit of critical traveling with some of our housing providers in the Southeast to meet face-to-face. But we're trying to be really strategic about when we have those face-to-face meetings and making sure that it's a really good use of that sort of little bit of increased risk.
Thank you so much. And with that, I think we have run out of time for this program. But again, anyone who is interested in learning more about the Citizens Institute for Rural Design or the speakers for today, you can reach out to CIRD@ruralhome.org, and I'll be happy to answer any more questions. Thank you so much for joining this presentation. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you to the National Endowment for the Arts. And stay safe, everyone. I hope that this presentation offered some inspiration to all of the rural communities out there working to make a positive message in today's world. Thank you.